Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We got a great show lined up for you tonight. Wednesday, December 2nd at 8 p.m. was the non-tender deadline for Major League Baseball teams, at which point they had to decide whether or not to offer contracts to arbitration-eligible players. So basically, teams either said, yep, we agree to pay you what arbitration says you're worth, or at this point, they cut them loose. These guys become free agents and are now free to sign wherever they want. So a ton of guys now find themselves out of a job. There were quite a few up in the air that were tendered contracts. So we're going to talk about all of that on today's show. The first couple of segments, we're going to jump through all of the players who were not tendered and are now free agents and free to sign anywhere. Then in segment number 3, we'll dive into a team-by-team kind of breakdown. So we'll get a look at it from a player's perspective, then a team's perspective, and then ultimately at the tail end of the episode, we'll talk about the latest news, notes, a couple of trades have gone down recently, and bring you guys up to date with everything going on across Major League Baseball. So let's jump right into it here today. Once again, thanks for joining us here now that we've transitioned to the month of December. Certainly crazy that it's going by that fast here, and spring training is right around the corner. But a few of these guys, and the ones I'm going to talk about here, they don't know where they're going to report in February. They now find themselves free to sign wherever they would please. Some of them, they could return back to the teams that did non-tender them contracts. So there are a few situations here. There are a few teams who have essentially looked at the market and said, okay, based on your history, based on the arbitration process, it breaks it down to where it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 7 million. Well, with all the economic ramifications, the coronavirus, everything that's taking place, we think that you would, if you would become a free agent, you would sign for only like $2.5, $3 million. So we're going to non-tender you, but then we do want to bring you back at a reduced cost. So, of course, not the ideal scenario if you're the player themselves, but from a team's perspective, and we've seen teams across Major League Baseball cutting personnel, cutting scouts, cutting employees that are making, probably $50,000, $75,000 a year. So if they can go from paying a guy $5.5 down to $3.5, that's something that they're going to try to take advantage of here this offseason. And just looking at the list here of all the guys who were arbitration eligible and not offered, there's a list of 30 to 40, 45 guys that are now part of the free agent pool for the 2021 season. So our friends at MLB.com, they put together a list based on wins above replacement. So they went back and looked at 2019 and 2020, combined those WAR numbers, put them together from greatest to least, and ranked a lot of these newly free agent guys. So I'm going to run through this list with you, kind of give my breakdown on each guy, see what's going on. Then once again, we'll do that for the first 2 segments. Then we'll go into the team perspective. So the guy at the top of the list, the one that everybody's reporting out there, Kyle Schwarber, outfielder of the Chicago Cubs. Of course, he was a huge key to them winning the World Series in 2016. Missed the entire regular season with a torn knee, then came back to hit over 400 in the World Series that year. So certainly Cubs fans remember that. But they also remember him hitting $188 this year, hitting 188, 250 a year ago. Swings and misses, struggles even more against left-handed hitters. during that time. So that's where, when it comes to the arbitration process and where he started based on the World Series contributions, it begins his number much higher, and then it kind of just expedites on itself. So the Cubs said, hey, man, for the production you're giving us, we're not just going to pay you 15, 17, 19 million. If you want to come back at 8 to 10, sure, but you're going to test the market and see what's out there. So I do think Schwarber gets an opportunity very quickly. I don't think it'll be a long-term big contract. I think you're looking at more of a prove-it deal for Schwarber just based on his down season in 2020. But I do think the guy will be sought after, and somebody, still as young as him with all the talent and all the potential. There's going to be some hitting coaches out there who are licking their chops trying to work with this guy to get him straightened out. So next on the list, kind of a surprise at number 2, Hanser Alberto of the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, Hanser, before he got to Baltimore, was basically a nobody. He was with the Texas Rangers, but looking at his statistics, he hit 143 and 185. Well, then he works his way over to Baltimore for 2019, puts together a nice little season. Hits 305, 12 home runs, 51 RBIs. They bring him back in 2020, has another successful season. He hit 283, 3 home runs, 22 RBIs. So he was a fan favorite in Baltimore. People loved him, but they're not going to win next year. And looking at his arbitration hierarchy, they're not looking to pay somebody, $5, $7, $10 million to play second or third base when they know, hey, they're not going to be here by the time our next window comes around. So let's move on from him now. But I certainly a nice little 2-year deal for Hanser out there on the market. Could be seen, and I think is something that he'll get no problem. So next on the list with 2.1 wins above replacement is Eddie Rosario. Of course, a member of the Twins bomb squad. He's gotten AL MVP votes the last couple of seasons, so he's obviously shown that he's been impressive offensively. But he just swings and misses too much. He chases a lot of pitches outside of the zone. He's got low on base rates when it comes to besides average, so he doesn't walk a lot. Strikes out more than he should. But he does have some big pop. He's got a nice arm defensively. So a third outfielder, a left fielder, for a contributing team, somebody who's close to the series, I think Rosario fits in nicely. I mean, the last couple of years, looking at the home run totals, 27, 24, 32, and then 13 on the shortened season. 78 RBIs, 77, 109, and then 42. So this is a middle-of-the-bat lineup. I mean, this guy could hit 5th or 6th for you, balance things out, and left-handed hitter. I think somebody's going to jump on that opportunity, and I don't think it's going to be to the value that Rosario thinks he's worth, because once again, with all of these guys now on the market, the supply is going to be much higher than the demand, and that's part of the reason why these guys are being let go, because owners see the future market and the ability to save cash, so they're moving on. But Rosario, I certainly think he'll find work sooner than later. Brian Goodwin of the Cincinnati Reds, next on the list at 2.0 wins above replacement. He was a surprise name to me. I mean, I had knew his name, but I didn't think he was performing that well in Cincinnati, and that's because he didn't. He kind of struggled after he got traded to the Reds, but he was good for the Angels before that. I mean, just in 2019, 17 home runs. So are people going to bet on the fact that, he can get back to that 2019 year where he hit 262, or is it going to be more 2020 where he hit 215? So Goodwin struggled to the point where, they're not going to bring him back for that price in Cincinnati, but Cincinnati wasn't the only, Goodwin wasn't the only guy from Cincinnati that was let go this past week. These next couple of guys on the list here as well. So Cincinnati let go of some notable players, the first one being Goodwin, the next one being pitcher Archie Bradley, the number 7 overall pick in the 2011 draft. He flashed potential as a reliever after he got moved to the bullpen in the middle of his career. Since then, he's had a nice little 3.51 ERA, and, Bradley was traded to the Reds from the Diamondbacks, so he was obviously just a rental for them and, somebody they're not looking to add long-term to the mix. But he's had himself a good number of years. I mean, 2017, he had a 1.73 ERA in 73 innings, 3.64 ERA, and then 3.52. So Archie Bradley is going to be sought after from the bullpen, and the way pricing is going to happen out there, I think he could be a nice find for people on the secondary market, because you got your Liam Hendricks, you got your Brad Hands, you got all the top names that everybody's discussing that are going to get the $8, $10, $12, $14 million a year. Then you sprinkle in Archie Bradley amongst the names below that. Well, when you dive into the next level analytics and the sabermetrics and you see the success, somebody like that being had for $4, $6, $7 million, I think there's going to be a market for those guys, and it's just going to be a matter of, ultimately who wants to pay just that extra little bit to get the guys in-house. But the third and final Cincinnati Red, the three guys all in a row, because all of their wins above replacement are between 1.8 and 2. But that's Kurt Casale, catcher behind the dish. A little bit of thump from the right-handed side. He hit 260, 18 home runs in less than 500 plate appearances across the last 3 seasons. So backup catcher in Cincinnati, moved over there after his time in Tampa Bay. The most games he's played at the major league level is 84. So certainly not an everyday catcher, but, backup catchers, they're certainly valuable. I mean, even here in Philadelphia, we had JT Realmuto, but those guys can't go every day. And again, if the schedule's a little bit wonky because of the coronavirus and we have these double headers lined up again, backup catchers could be more valuable than ever. And a guy who shows a little bit of pop from the right side and even an above adequate bat is going to be sought after in free agency, that's for sure. Next on the list, Hansel Robles, right-handed pitcher. He was let go by the Angels, struggled to find his form last year in 2020. He had a 2.97 ERA in 37 games down the stretch back in 2018, but really struggled this past year. So does somebody think that they could fix him, that they'll be able to get him in and straighten him out? Because 2019, 2.48 ERA, pretty good. 2020, 10.26 ERA in 16 innings, not so good. So Hansel Robles let go because his 2020 performance did not live up to where they think he's going to be in 2021. But relievers are so volatile. I mean, 1 year to the next, you can be lights out and then all of a sudden can't find it. And, so that's where these guys really are a lottery ticket, and just take your best guess ultimately as to what you're going to get. So next up on the list here, Danny Santana of the Texas Rangers. He was the Rangers Player of the Year in 2019. He hit 283 with 28 home runs and 81 RBIs. So he was fantastic that year for them, but he was slowed in 2020 by an injury and ultimately, struggled, and his availability for 2021 is still in doubt. So 2019, if that's what you get, man, this guy's going to be a steal on the market. But if he's still struggling from that injury, he had 145 in 15 games last year. If he's not going to be ready, and Texas being in rebuilding mode, is looking to give at-bats to somebody else internally. But Danny Santana, if he's able to bounce back and be healthy, man, he's going to be a steal for the price that you can get him at for 2021. Adam Duvall, this was a surprise for the Atlanta Braves. I know they have a crowded outfield, but non-tendering Duvall was certainly something that not a lot of people were expecting. He hit 16 home runs, drove in 33 runs in only 57 games here in 2020. So he was above average OPS during his time in Atlanta. Barreled up the ball. Sabermetrics, again, ranked 16th above barrel percentage. So, the people are going to be jumping at this one. Now, of course, it depends on where you're at in your process and which team you're at, because he does swing and miss a little bit. There's some holes, but young, nice team in Atlanta, people didn't think Duvall that they would move on from. Now, people, again, are talking about how he could be brought back at a cheaper price. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Next up is John Breba. He was a right-handed pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was non-tendered. He burst onto the scene in 2017. Had a 2.44 ERA, followed that up with a 3.20 ERA, but then ultimately had Tommy John and missed the 2020 season. So he'll be coming off of Tommy John, looking for work for somebody coming into 2021. Next up, Greg Garcia. Greg Garcia is a fantastic pinch hitter last year in San Diego. Not a full-time guy out there, but came up in the St. Louis system. Spent 5 years in St. Louis before the last 2 in San Diego. Ultimately, second baseman, shortstop, third baseman, a lot of versatility for Garcia. But, he hit 200 in 35 games and only 60 at-bats in 2020. So San Diego looking to get a bit more value on the bench. But Tyler Naquin, he'll be the last one we'll talk about here in the first segment. He's got one of the strongest arms in baseball, and yet he's one of the worst defenders when it comes to sabermetrics and all the StatCast that's going on. He also struggled at the plate this past year, hitting .218 in Cleveland. But left-handed hitter, I think he gets another shot. I know he's shown some promise in the past. Again, 2019 had a solid year, .288, 10 home runs. Just as a fourth outfielder, I think he can do worse, and a pinch hitter off the bench. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But we'll pause here right now. We got a lot of names to keep running through here. A lot of guys now free agents. So thanks for sticking with us this episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll keep running through the list of guys. Have you heard the one that you were thinking about? Stick around. Find out.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. If you haven't checked us out on social media, please do so. Head to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, GSMC Baseball. We very much appreciate it, as well as like, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're listening to this, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I know I'm seeing Spotify's top podcasts, top playlists all over social media. I guess the end of the year, when you log in, they'll send those to you. If you guys just happen to have the GSMC Baseball Podcast and your top played, most played, whatever it comes up as, send us a picture, tweet at us, GSMC Baseball. We'd love to show you some love. We'd love to get you some 15 seconds of fame here. And we very much appreciate you guys listening. I know I do, at least talking to you guys here twice a week. But this second segment is going to be a bit particular, a bit peculiar when it comes to the content here, because really these guys that I'm going to run through are guys that are frustrating the heck out of their old fan bases, but people from outside of those cities are going to look in and see the potential of that prospect. Because just from a Phillies perspective here, real quick, right? So the Phillies, they tendered every single one of their players. They didn't non-tender anybody this year, but there were 2 on the list that locals were hoping would be non-tendered. The first one was relief pitcher Hector Neris. They agreed to a $5 million deal with him, and he's back. And then they tendered a contract to Vincent Velasquez, Vinny Velo, who drives all of us nuts here locally. So those guys will be back, and the locals aren't happy with it. And these guys that I'm going to talk to you about are going to be right along the lines of Vince Velasquez and Hector Neris. Well, where locally they're going, good, get rid of him, I don't want him anymore. But from the outside looking in, you go, hey, this guy's throwing 95 with a nasty splitter. If it's Hector Neris, or if it's Vinny Velo, hey, this guy's got 4 pitches and he's mid-90s. Like, we'll be able to figure him out. So stats may not jump off the books here, but these guys, I'm telling you, are the ones that have high potential and were high prospects, but maybe haven't put it all together completely here. So starting off where we left off once again, Matt Andriese, a right-handed pitcher. Let's see here. He was formerly of the LA Angels. They moved on from him. He's got a 4.65 ERA since the start of 2019, but again, strikes out 112 guys in 102 innings. So ERA is high, but strikes out a lot of guys. So feast or famine with a lot of these guys that we're going to be reading through here. Matt Weisler of the Minnesota Twins, he was let go. He had a breakout 2020 season, actually, so this one was a bit of a surprise in Minnesota. He spent 3 years in Atlanta where he was not very good. 4.71, 5.00, and 8.35 ERA. Then fast forward to 2020 in Minnesota, put him in the bullpen, 1.07 ERA in 25 innings. So Weisler finds himself at the top of the free agent list now when it comes to relievers, and somebody who, is going to get paid because he threw 81% sliders, which is just fascinating, but struck out 35 batters across 25 innings and allowed a batting average of 143 against that slider. So people know it's coming. Still weren't able to hit it in 2020. Do the Twins expect Major League Baseball to be able to make an adjustment and thus be able to come around on that slider next year? But, man, that's a crazy decision to me to let a guy walk who just had a 1.07 ERA and almost a strikeout and a half per inning. So we'll see if the Twins know what they're doing. Carlos Rodon, left-handed pitcher from the White Sox. They took him third overall in 2014. So here it is once again, high prospect, somebody with high value, just hasn't been able to put it all together. Injuries, crushed his development. He's only thrown 40 innings over the last 2 seasons, and he's got a 5.74 ERA. So high draft pick, a lot of potential, ton of injuries, hasn't put it together. The White Sox decide to move on. The Phillies bring back the prospect. And that's where these guys, it's going to be interesting to, remember these names and look next year, because there's going to be a handful of these guys that end up in new locations. They get a fresh setting, a fresh set of eyes. Somebody moves them from the left side to the right side of the rubber or tweaks a mechanic with them offensively, and something's going to click, and they're going to figure it out. Jake Diekman was with the Phillies and couldn't throw a strike. Then he went to Texas. Then he went to Oakland. Then he watched Pitching Ninja and discovered a slider grip. And now he's got one of the most disgusting pitches in all of baseball. So it's just a matter of time and ultimately the right place and the right time for these guys to get it to come together and be really effective. But Ariel Urido is also looking for a job. He was let go by the Mets. He had a 5.85 ERA during his time with the Rangers, and then only one appearance with the Mets due to some injuries this past offseason. But next on the list, Delano DeShields. He stole 20 bases for 3 straight years, so a bit of a speedster, but the Cleveland Indians decided it was time to move on. He was with the Texas Rangers years prior to that, so 1 year in Cleveland, he did not impress enough ultimately to bring him back. He was part of the Corey Kluber deal that brought him back to Cleveland. So, interesting move there. The Kansas City Royals, they moved on from Maikel Franco. My guy Maikel, former Philadelphia Philly. He led the Royals in doubles and RBIs, but it looks like his salary was going to go from $2 to $5 million. And this is a key instance where the Royals, they're rumored to be looking back, bring back Maikel at a lower price. Not just pay him that $5 million, but bring him back at something similar to that 2.5, and get basically similar production from Franco coming back. But Ben Gamel, he is now a free agent. He was let go. He was not tendered by the Milwaukee Brewers. He was acquired from Seattle at the end of 2018. He had 174 games for the Brewers the past 2 years. He hit .245, played all 3 outfield positions, so a bit of versatility defensively. May find himself looking at a 4th outfield spot moving forward. Nomar Mazara, man, this is a little bit of a surprise. He was once a top 20 prospect in all of baseball for the White Sox, and, he just hasn't been able to hit. And, since he's gotten to the bigs, he's hitting just career .228, but he's still only 25. So this is case in point where huge prospect, 25 years old, but Chicago, they're not waiting for him. And his time in Texas hasn't put it together. They're saying, man, we got bigger things. We're moving on. But there's certainly a rebuilding team out there like the Orioles or Oakland who's looking at value. Tampa Bay, it screams like one of these guys to bring them in at below cost and get them into your system, straighten them out. And, man, you could have some success there for sure. But David Dahl is now a free agent. He was the 10th overall pick in the 2012 draft. So, again, a lot of guys, high prospects, just haven't put it together. You know, Dahl's shown some promise during his time with the Rockies, but he keeps getting hurt. He's only played 100 games most in 2019. He's still only 26 years old, missed half the season last year. So, you know, can the guy stay healthy? Can he not? But the Rockies, they grew frustrated, and they basically said, no, we're not going to pay you to stay injured, man. You can go get a paycheck from somebody else. So A.J. Cole, right-handed pitcher of the Blue Jays, you know, he was second on the staff in appearances with 24 this past season, had a 3.09 ERA, so somebody who was effective in Toronto, but based on the price and based on what Toronto's trying to do, they're looking for an upgrade at the back end of the bullpen, and they're just going to move on from the 28-year-old and try to do a little bit better here. So let's see. Man, there's a lot of names on this list. We'll keep rolling through. Jeffrey Rodriguez, only 27, shoulder injuries in 2019, missed all of 2020. The Cleveland Indians look to bring him back, but Rodriguez decided to opt out of a minor league deal, so hopefully he'll be fully healthy for 2021 and get an opportunity elsewhere. Jose Urena, he was designated by assignment by the Marlins, so he threw nearly 600 innings for them since 2015, 4.60 ERA, solid back end of the rotation kind of guy, number 4, number 5. He had COVID for 2020, so he missed a lot of the year, and then he broke a forearm on a comebacker. So the Marlins continuing to stay young, continuing to stay cheap, staying away from Jose Urena. Ryan Stanek next on the list. Tampa Bay Rays. He had a 3.55 ERA as the opener, relief pitcher, one of those guys down there in Tampa. He didn't throw a lot in 2020. He had coronavirus, so that limited his opportunities there. Chichi Gonzalez next on the list. He struggled for the Rockies the last couple of years. ERAs in the 5s, over 20 appearances. Over his career, he's got a 5.12 ERA, but, 99 strikeouts in over 100 innings. But big-time stuff, again, just hasn't put it together, hasn't stayed healthy. But some pitching coaches out there could look at him as somebody that they could certainly figure out. So Justin Anderson, right-handed pitcher, 28 years old, 4.75 ERA for the Angels over the past couple of years before he missed 2020 due to Tommy John. So that's somebody that could come back and surprise, come back even better. Jonathan Holder, right-handed pitcher. Yankees decided to let him go after a 4.38 ERA over the course of 5 seasons. But the last couple of years, he hasn't been as good. He's been at 5.86 average over the past 2 years, so started strong. But, again, the Yankees are just looking at it and thinking, man, you're going the wrong way. And ultimately, your price tag keeps going up. So we're going to ultimately move on and, see where it takes us from here. So Paul Sewald, another pitcher, wasn't tendered. 9 runs in 6 innings for the Mets this past year. 30 years old, 5.5 ERA for the Mets. Not sure ultimately what his future holds. Chasen Shreve, lefty reliever for the Mets. He was let go. Struck out 34 in 25 innings and did have a 3.96 ERA. Really effective against lefties who were only 2 for 32. So they could look to bring back Shreve ultimately, but I do think Sewald is not coming back to New York. Ryan Tempera next on the list. He was a trusted member of the Cubs bullpen, 3.92 ERA, over 20 innings in 2020. But he's 33 years old. He's going to enter free agency for the first time with a 3.66 ERA over 236 big league innings. So Ryan Tempera finally made it to free agency at the age of 33. Good for you, Ryan. Man, it takes a long time for some of these guys. So let's continue down the list here. R.J. Alanis, 12 appearances for his career, only in 2019. The Reds ultimately moved on. Kenyon Middleton, he only played 6 games for the Angels. He's coming off of Tommy John, still only 27 with high upside. Jace Peterson, he's played all 4 corner spots, left field, right field, first, second base in 26 games for the Brewers. So this guy's played a little bit of everything. Alex Colito, a left-handed pitcher. He's owned left-handed hitters during his career, but right-handers have certainly taken advantage of that. And, the new 3-batter minimum rule is ultimately something that, really makes him less effective, because if you could bring him in for a lefty and then 2 righties, it's not worth that move anymore. But Nick Tropiano, he was excellent in the Pirates bullpen in 2020. But let's see, 19 strikeouts in 15 innings. The Mets claimed him off of waivers at the end of last year, but ultimately did not tender him a contract. So it'll be fascinating to see if somebody jumps on that opportunity. You have Clay Holmes, right-handed pitcher. He's thrown a 5.58 ERA in 2019. Only 1 appearance this last year due to injury. Rangel Rivero, first baseman outfielder. He's 28. Spent most of his time in AAA last year. He was due for arbitration due to some big league time with the Cardinals. And then the last couple of guys here at the bottom of the list, now that we're back into the negative WAR, we'll kind of just run through the names. That way, if anything jumps out for you guys, I mentioned it. But Jimmy Haggart of the Rangers, right-handed pitcher. You have Jose Martinez, a DH outfielder for the Cardinals. He was good in 2018, but now struggling. Hobie Milner, he had a great year for the Phillies way back when, but he's turned 30 and has a high ERA since then. Eric Mejia for the Royals, a utility player. He's played sparingly over the past 2 years, hasn't been super effective. Travis Shaw, third baseman, first baseman. He's slumped since his time with the Brewers, but that's a name you guys may recognize out there. You have Albert Amora Jr., 6th overall in the 2012 draft. I mean, a solid defender, but again, just can't seem to find the bat offensively. Bubba Starling, 5th overall in 2011. Never really found his stride with the Royals. He's only hit he hit 215 back in 2019. And then you have Edgar Garcia, acquired by the Rays from the Phillies. They didn't tender him. And Tony Walters, a defensive first catcher, who was let go ultimately. So a ton of guys out there. If you're saying, man, I don't even know a lot of these guys, well, that's because, again, locally in your market, these are the guys that frustrate the heck out of you because they were high picks. They have a ton of potential, but have just never been able to put it together. So that'll do it, though, for segment number 2. That'll do it for the players side of things. We'll pause one more time. We'll step aside here for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, then we'll go to the team side of things. We'll kind of wrap things up. Who did you guys non-tender? Where you at? So stick around. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Thursday, December 3rd. We are chugging along towards Christmas. Thanksgiving has come and gone. We're now in the 12th month of the year, 2020. Man, please get out of here as quickly as you can. It's been a long year for all of us out there. So I know there's been some joyous times, some positive things that have happened, I'm sure, in your life. as well as mine, but it certainly seems that the majority of things have been a bit on the negative side. So I'm looking forward to getting to 2021 and seeing what that has in store for all of us. But as the days progress, hopefully you're enjoying yourself. Hopefully you're taking time to be thankful and enjoy the holiday season as we cruise along here. But this is the third segment. Welcome back. I appreciate it. We're going to jump into a team-by-team breakdown of non-tender candidates that took place here over the past 24 hours, because I just read off a ton of names, and you guys listening out there are probably like, I don't even know who that is or who he plays for. So kind of giving you a team-by-team breakdown of ultimately what their efforts were when it comes to the non-tender deadline, and we'll just start alphabetically. So the Arizona Diamondbacks, they tendered every one of their players that was available. They released Junior Guerrera last month, but he was the only non-tender candidate that they really had. So if you're a Diamondbacks fan out there and wondering, okay, well, who did we tender a contract to? Everybody who was eligible got a contract offer from you guys. So no surprises. And again, this is typically more the norm, because a lot of times it takes a very special and rare occasion for a Kyle Schwarber or a Chris Bryant, who was tendered a contract this year by the Cubs, because his arbitration level is between, 17, 19, 21 off the top of my head. And again, that's because he had won an MVP. They'd won a World Series. A lot of times these guys in arbitration are still trying to figure things out. They're going from $2.5 million to $5 million on the top end on the third year of arbitration. So a lot of times when things are going well and teams are just cruising along, they don't think twice about paying a reliever $4 million, because even if he stinks, they can bury that contract and not have to worry about, the ramification of the dollar. But here in 2020 and in 2021, every single penny is being counted by almost every one of these owners. So, to see Arizona basically say, hey, we're just going to go on business as usual, it's nice to see from a player's perspective. But the Atlanta Braves, the only non-tender they had was Adam Duvall. Like we spoke about, they signed Johan Camargo to a 2021 contract, so he'll earn $1.36. He was also a non-tender candidate, but since they offered him, that's ultimately why Duvall was let go. But they could look to bring him back. They're just hopefully waiting for the DH to come full-time to the National League before they bring back more depth in the outfield. Next up, we have the Baltimore Orioles. Like I said, Hanser Alberto. He was the only non-tender for the Orioles. They had earlier parted ways with Renato Nunez, and then they also signed catcher Pedro Severino. So both of those guys were non-tender candidates, but moved on from one earlier and brought one back, which led Hanser Alberto to be their only decision here Wednesday night. So the Boston Red Sox, they tendered every one of their potential players. They're bringing everybody back. So Red Sox fans should be happy about that. The Chicago Cubs, Kyle Schwarber, like we talked about, but also Jose Martinez, Albert Almora, and Ryan Tepera were non-tendered or are now free agents and no longer members of the Chicago Cubs. Chris Bryant was indeed tendered a contract, so that was another one of the big ones people were talking about, and Chris Bryant will be back with the Cubbies in 2021, although not for sure. He could still be traded, but he's not just going to be a free agent, as people had possibly discussed. The White Sox non-tendered Carlos Rodon and Nomar Mazara. Like we spoke about, those were two guys, both high prospects that really didn't pan out. So the White Sox looking to move on and get more established players in as they look to take that next step under Tony La Russa and ultimately make a playoff run after they were eliminated here early in 2020. The Cincinnati Reds, they were busy. Like I said, you had Goodwin, Bradley, and Casali at the top of the list, but you also had Kyle Farmer and R.J. Alanis not brought back. Farmer, he re-signed afterwards with a minor league deal, it looks like, so he was not brought back at the major league level, but was brought back at the minor league level. So got to make sure you read the details out here. Like I said, hey, we're not going to pay you and guarantee you a big league spot, but we're going to cut you and bring you back on a minor league level contract and that's certainly going to work out a bit more if you're a Reds fan. So next on the list here, the Cleveland Indians. They had Tyler McQueen, Delano DeShields, and Jeffrey Rodriguez non-tendered. So moving on from those three guys, Rodriguez had a shoulder and back issue. They look to bring him back potentially on a minor league deal, but ultimately if he's interested or looking to test the market, it'll be to be determined on Jeffrey Rodriguez. We have the Colorado Rockies, non-tenders, David Dahl, Tony Wolters, and Chichi Gonzalez. So three guys for the Rockies as they move on. A lot of those guys dealing with injuries, so not a ton of surprises coming out of Colorado's camp, but three guys moving on. Next up, we have the Detroit Tigers. They tendered all of their candidates. This makes sense as a rebuilding team is a little bit more lenient with those guys that are at the end of the rope. Like Vince Velasquez, like Hector Neris. I'll keep referencing them just because locally, again, it's all over Twitter that a lot of people are not pleased. And it's almost Groundhog's Day here in Philadelphia as we get into year 5 of Vincent Velasquez. But if you're a rebuilding team, you're not worried about making the playoffs, you're willing to give those guys more time to be able to find themselves and figure things out, as opposed to somebody who's really looking for that push and says, hey, we don't have time for another year of you to put your stuff together. So it'll be interesting to see, again, a lot of these decisions and how they work out and where these guys find homes. And if they're just kind of traded non-tender guys for non-tender guys at cheaper contracts, ultimately by the time things stabilize themselves. So the Houston Astros, they didn't have any as well. They outrighted Roberto Ozuna earlier this offseason, making him a free agent. He was a non-tender candidate, but since released. So that makes Ryan Presley the full-time closer down there in Houston. An upgrade for Ryan. Let's see. The Kansas City Royals. Maikel Franco, Jason Guzman, Eric Mejia, and Bubba Starling were all let go by the Kansas City Royals. Franco, he was going to make anywhere from $5 to $8 million. And again, he's probably worth 1.5 or 2. But just based on playing time, progression, where he is in his career, that's something that Kansas City wasn't looking to pay that level to. He did hit 278, 8 home runs for him last year, so I think he'll find a job. But he's somebody, again, in Philadelphia that was always so frustrating. He would never go to right field, never use right center, always pulls off, flies open, and people just spin breaking ball after breaking ball, and he continues to swing through, and you're just yelling at the television for the guy to make an adjustment. So the LA Angels, they were busy Wednesday night. Kenyon Middleton, Hansel Robles, Holby Milner, Justin Anderson, and Matt Andriese all let go by the LA Angels. They will not be brought back in 2021 for those guys. So the Angels continue to try to find that balance between young prospects, young draft picks, and old veterans that they're paying. So they're looking, again, for another wave internally moving forward here, because a lot of these guys just couldn't cut it. And really, again, it's a good move by L.A. because the definition of insanity, right? Bring them back, try again. At least they're churning through these guys and looking to make a move. The L.A. Dodgers, they tendered everyone. Even Scott Alexander, they agreed to a contract with, so they didn't let anybody go. The Miami Marlins, Ryan Stanek, he was the only guy let go as Urena was designated for assignment a few weeks ago. So not just this past evening, but people knew they were moving on from him already. The Milwaukee Brewers non-tenders, they had Ben Gamel, Alex Colito, and Jace Peterson. So they'll move on from the three of those guys moving forward. The Minnesota Twins, Eddie Rosario and Matt Wisler. Like we talked about, Rosario cleared waivers. They're looking to get him back, but ultimately we'll have to wait and see. Chasen Shreve of the New York Mets. Steven Matz was tendered by the Mets. He was another one that was potentially on the list, but ultimately came to a deal. And right-hander Robert Gesselman was also tendered a contract. So the Mets handed out a few more contracts that had originally been anticipated, but with new ownership and money, not looking like an issue for the Mets like it is for everybody else. They offer Matz and Gesselman tendered contracts to bring them back to give them another shot to run back things in 2021. So the New York Yankees, they non-tendered Jonathan Holder. They did bring back Gary Sanchez. He was one of the big question marks and the biggest candidate Was he going to be worth the price after he really struggled in 2021, or is he going to be able to bounce back? So the Yankees not giving up on Gary Sanchez just quite yet. The Oakland Athletics, they tendered everyone. Let's see, they signed Tony Kemp, Chad Pinder to some contracts, so they were able to avoid arbitration with those guys. The Philadelphia Phillies, they tendered every one of their players. Like I said, locals not super pleased about it. They were hoping to move on from Vince Velasquez, Hector Neris, but they'll be back in action for the Fightin' Phils here in 2021. Next, we have the Pittsburgh Pirates. They non-tendered Clay Holmes. Trevor Williams was released last month, so ultimately he was the other gentleman on the list that could potentially have been let go, and he was here. So the St. Louis Cardinals, Rangel Rivero and John Brebbia were let go and not brought back by the Cardinals. And then we had the San Diego Padres, Greg Garcia. The Padres will indeed tender Tommy Pham. Pham, he had a bit of an altercation. Let's see, he was stabbed during an off-season altercation, but it seems to be that he is okay. That was making him a non-tender candidate, but ultimately San Diego decides to bring him back for 2021. You have the San Francisco Giants. They non-tendered Tyler Anderson. So he was the only guy for the Giants that they let go, and they're moving on from. The Seattle Mariners, they non-tendered, nobody. Everybody is back. Of course, J.P. Crawford, Mitch Haniger, Tom Murphy were the only guys at risk of potentially being not tendered. But all of those guys had stronger 2020s and, earned themselves another contract here in 2021. The Tampa Bay Rays, they let go of Edgar Garcia. They also released Hunter Renfroe just a few weeks ago, deciding to move on from him. Next up, we have the Texas Rangers. Danny Santana, Jimmy Hergert, and Scott Henneman were ultimately all let go by Texas down there. They could decide to bring back, Santana. He was projected to make $4 million in 2021. They like his versatility, playing multiple positions, but he did struggle offensively, so that's where they're probably looking at that going, man, we're not paying you $4 million. We'll give you the veteran minimum or one or two, but ultimately we're going to try to get you at a much lesser price before we offer you that contract. So the Toronto Blue Jays non-tendered Travis Shaw and A.J. Cole. Shaw was able to bounce back after a bad 2019, but ultimately didn't perform to where the Blue Jays wanted him. And then last but not least, the Washington Nationals, they tendered every one of their potential guys, including signing Joe Ross to a $1.5 million contract. So a lot of teams there you heard at the bottom level, the Mariners, the Nationals, guys who are rebuilding, guys who have cash flow, they tend to tender a lot of their guys, bring them in. The Philadelphia Phillies, again, haven't made the playoffs in quite some time, so they're willing to give another year to a lot of these guys that frustrate fan bases. But ultimately, today was a different day. It really was. This day during normal off seasons is not a big day because everybody tenders contracts. Yeah, of course, it's arbitration. You're only going to make $2, $3, $4 million. And in the grand scheme of things, where there's no salary cap or no limit, they offer these guys contracts and then they cut them later. Like it's not a huge deal. So a lot of times people are discussing that this is going to be a sticking point between the negotiations, between the players and the committee, because there's going to be guys saying, hey, I earned that $4 to $6 million that I was due this year in my arbitration, and just based on not having fans, COVID-19, the coronavirus, now I'm not going to earn that, and I'm going to have to take major league minimum. I could certainly see how that would be frustrating coming down the stretch here. But that's how all 30 teams handled Wednesday night. My Phillies, they offered everybody a contract, so like it or hate it, Hector Neris, Vince Velasquez, they'll be back. Chris Bryant gets a deal. Gary Sanchez gets a deal. So really, again, Schwarber, the only guy jumping off the list here as potentially a big money guy now in free agency. But that'll wrap things up here for the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll step aside one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll wrap things up talking about a couple of trades, news, notes, what's going on. So stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Speaking of the podcast network, do yourself a favor. Check out the other shows within the podcast network. Wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Spotify, again, with all those playlists coming out, let us know if we are one of your most listened to podcasts of 2020. Shoot us a picture on Twitter. But Spotify, Apple Podcasts, rate and review, search GSMC. Do all that good stuff for 2020. We very much appreciate it here as we continue to bring you guys quality content, bringing you guys episodes on a daily basis as we rage towards the offseason. But we got a couple of trades to talk about now, a couple of offseason signings, and then we got rumors, news, and notes to close out today's episode. So there were a couple of trades to be had on Wednesday during the non-tender deadline. First being the Angels. They added shortstop Jose Iglesias from the Baltimore Orioles. They'll be sending minor league right-hander Garrett Stallings and Gene Pinto back over to Baltimore. Of course, Iglesias now gives the Angels a replacement at shortstop after Andrelton Simmons is now going to be a free agent and was not extended a qualifying offer. L.A. has David Fletcher if needed, but certainly Iglesias is going to be taking over at shortstop. So this is the first move by Angels' new GM, Perry Manayasin. I'm sorry, I forget that one every time I look at it, and then I remember Manayasin. Perry Manayasin, his first big trade. So he knows Jose. Jose's been around. He's a veteran in his own right. So Manayasin liked his character, liked Iglesias' work ethic. He turns 31 in January. He's in the second year of a 2-year, $6 million deal. So he's set at $3.5 million. And this could, be the stopgap for 1 year until the next year's offseason class at shortstop is absolutely loaded. If nothing were to change, you got Corey Seager, Lindor, Trevor Story, Carlos Correa, Javier Baez. So basically everybody's looking to get to next offseason who's in the shortstop market, and with 5-6 guys, man, it could drive their price tags down because they're competing with each other. So Jose Iglesias goes from Baltimore out to L.A., it'll be a nice addition to that infield. Of course, they got Rendon over there at third, Albert Pujols at first. You move Fletcher to second, put Iglesias in there at shortstop, and then that's a nice little four there, in L.A. But who did Baltimore get back? Stallings. He was selected in the 5th round by the Angels in 2019. So a young kid's really trying to find his footing. Pinto, he's only 19. He was signed as an international free agent. So Baltimore's basically taken 2 lottery tickets back for a season of Jose Iglesias at the shortstop position. So this is a rare occasion where I think on the surface, I like this deal for both teams. I think L.A., they needed a shortstop for just 1 year until they get to that market next year. And then Baltimore says, yeah, I'll take an early draft pick and an international free agent. We'll hit the lottery. We're not doing anything this year. We're probably going to be in the basement again in the AL East. So we'll look to add a guy to our window 3 years from now. We appreciate it. So both teams seem to be working out here with this one. A second trade took place Wednesday night. Former All-Star relief pitcher Corey Knebel was traded by the Milwaukee Brewers to the L.A. Dodgers. Knebel was non-tendered right before the deadline and then ultimately traded to L.A. He's coming off of his Tommy John surgery and struggling, numbers-wise, but L.A. certainly thinks that they can get him turned around. Knebel broke out back in 2017, had a 1.78 ERA, 120 strikeouts in 76 innings. But then he tore his UCL in 2019 and has basically spent the last 18 months rehabbing. He did surface in 2020, but had a 6.08 ERA. His fastball was down to 95, so not back at its full jump. But the Dodgers, they're looking at the end of his season where it did seem to be maybe he was turning a corner, and ultimately are looking to take a ticket back to see if he can get to his all-star self, and he'll be due $5 million based on arbitration and where he's at next year. So a couple of trades made around the non-tender deadline. There were also a couple of recent signings out there across Major League Baseball. The last notable three was Trevor May signing with the New York Mets. And this could be a very nice under-the-radar signing. It's a 2-year deal. Terms were not disclosed yet, but it's reportedly right around $15 million. So 2 years, $16 million. I mean, again, he may not be the highest of names out there, but this guy has been really good the last couple of years. So the Mets, I think, got better by adding Trevor May because May misses bats. I mean, if you look at it, he had a 39.6% strikeout rate, which was 9th best. And that's right behind Liam Hendricks, who's at the top of the free agent market at 40.2. So May, coming off of Tommy John, figuring it out, finding himself the last couple of seasons, this guy misses bats. And, you know, he's been moved from the rotation to the bullpen, and now he's found himself at the back end of the bullpen. He's got increased velocity. He's been up to 99 miles an hour even this past season in September when he was throwing against Jose Abreu. So the reason he's not jumping off the list or jumping off the page is because career, he's got a 4.44 ERA and only 7 saves, so he's never been used in the 9th inning. He doesn't have that low ERA. But again, he was a starter for a couple of years. He was ineffective for a couple of years, and now he certainly found himself. And I think he's a guy in the NL East that is going to bring some pain to the likes of the Phillies and Nationals. And man, I'm not happy with that signing as a Phillies fan here. So another signing, Michael A. Taylor signed with the Kansas City Royals. It was a 1-year, $1.75 million deal for Taylor. Let's see here. He's got a high strikeout rate, so he struggles to put the ball in play, but, he's very good defensively. He's had some knee injuries in the past, but as a fourth outfielder, he's a guy it's not bad to take a ticket on. He's shown defensively what he can do. He's got some pop. He ran into a 493-foot home run out in Coors Field in his past. So, when he runs into one, he could be an effective signing for the Royals. I got no problem with that. But the Royals were busy because they also signed Mike Minor to a 2-year, $18 million deal. There's also a $13 million club option for 2023. So this could go to a 3-year, $31 million deal for Mike Minor. And honestly, that's a bit higher than I thought he was going to get this offseason. Of course, he struggled since he's had a bunch of injuries, but 5.65 ERA, not great. But ultimately, that's a nice deal for Mike Minor, and that one really had me surprised. So that's it for the trades. That's it for the signings. Now we're just going to get into some rumors, some news notes, what's going on across the league. But it's been reported that the Blue Jays are actually interested in Gene Segura of the Philadelphia Phillies. He keeps coming up in trade talks. A versatile player. He's been on the move a lot. The Phillies got him from Seattle. Now he's back in trade talks again. Here in Philadelphia, they are open to moving Segura. He started at shortstop, then he moved to third base, second base. He's really not the best defensively at shortstop anymore, which is why the team signed Didi Gregorius. But Segura, he's been okay. He's hit .275, about 20 home runs during his time with the Phillies, but he's also been traded 4 times since 2012. He's gone from the Angels to the Brewers, Brewers to the Diamondbacks, Diamondbacks to the Mariners, and then Mariners to the Phillies. And he's also got 2 years and just about $30 million left on his deal. And that's the area that the Phillies want to move on from. That's the area that the fan base wants to move on from is clearing Segura's contract because the Phillies, they're looking to sign JT Realmuto. So if they could get $15 million off the books from Segura, that makes it a lot easier to give JT 20 to 25 that he's looking for. So the Phillies projected payroll $146 for 2021. That's $39 million lower than it was last year. And if they can move on from Gene Segura, add another $15 million to that number, and now you're starting to have some fun if you're a Phillies fan and making another big move for one of these free agents. The next rumor we have for you is that Corey Kluber is going to end up with the Boston Red Sox. It's been reported that the Yankees, the Mets, or the Red Sox are interested, but there's a couple of different reporters showing the Red Sox, and only one of them talking Mets and Yankees. So, again, the Red Sox, pitching's at the top of their wish list for 2020. They got Chris Sale dealing with an arm injury. They moved on from a couple of other guys, so a short-term deal for Kluber could be a win for the Red Sox because his home is in the greater Boston area. Apparently, he's progressing well from that injury this offseason and last year. It's expected that Kluber is going to throw a bullpen here in the next couple of days. And the Red Sox certainly align with somebody who, low risk, high reward, coming off an injury, not a big deal. But the Yankees connected to Kluber. They've also been connected to Tanaka, bringing him back. James Paxton's moving on. J.A. Happ's moving on. So they need help in the rotation. The Mets always looking for help in the rotation. If they can't sign Trevor Bauer, they could transition themselves to the next best thing in Corey Kluber, even after bringing back Marcus Stroman. So a lot of interesting decisions, could be made here over the next couple of days. But you have the Giants and Blue Jays interested in Marcell Ozuna. He continues to be adding teams to the list. He signed 1 year, $18 million with the Braves, and then led the National League in homers and RBIs. So he's certainly going to get paid, and I don't know who it's going to be, but as the days go by, I'm not sure that the Atlanta Braves are no longer the favorite in the clubhouse. And I think the more and more teams get involved, the more and more his price is going to be, market level. And I don't think he's going to be one of these guys that gets ultimately underpaid. But 1 year, 18, give him 2 and 40, 3 and 55, and I think you could find yourself a deal with Marcell Ozuna. But as we continue down the list here, the Nationals remain unlikely to land a big-ticket item. So the Nationals, they've been connected to DJ LeMahieu, Chris Bryant, Trevor Bauer. But as it's coming out here a lot of times that they're saying they're going to stand pat there in Washington. Juan Soto, Trey Turner, they like these guys. Yes, they have to make some upgrades and replacements. Adam Eaton, Eric Thames, Kurt Suzuki. But ultimately, they don't think they're going to pull the trigger on somebody big like Bryant or LeMahieu and could look to add some value at the margins based on non-tender candidates and future free agents and moving forward that way. So ultimately, the Nationals, they sniffed around the big market, but I don't think they're going to be pulling the trigger anytime soon. Next, we have the Reds. They're prioritizing the shortstop position. Does this put them into conversation with Francisco Lindor? Apparently, they're taking a look at Lindor. They're taking a look at Trevor Story on the trade market. They've also been linked to pursuing Marcus Semien, D. Gregorius, Andrelton Simmons. Freddie Galvis was there in 2020, and he's not going to be back. So the Reds, they're being linked to making a big upgrade at the shortstop spot. James McCann, he's drawing plenty of interest. Apparently, the New York Mets are very interested in him and are making him a priority actually over JT Realmuto right now. They're more interested in McCann and going that route, and then that would lead me to believe that they're going to add Bauer and potentially a Lindor or a Springer on that side of things. But McCann had a great year in 2019, all-star selection, solid again in 2020. So the Yankees, the Mets, the Cardinals, the Angels, the Phillies, all interested in McCann, and whoever doesn't get JT Realmuto is going to transition their interest and, pursuit much heavy. So back to the Japan guy coming over, Sugano. The Padres, Giants, and Yankees could be interested in him. Again, he was posted, so they're going to have to pay his fee, but ultimately there is interest there stateside, and he will be getting an opportunity. But the Mets continue to stay interested in George Springer. Like I said, if they're going McCann, I think they go Springer and Bauer, and they're looking to add those three because going after McCann, that sets it up to go outfield, and I like that use of resources. Honestly, I'm a George Springer over JT Realmuto guy just based on the position they play and the value they bring. I think that's a smarter way to go. And the last news and notes I have here for you is the Blue Jays. They, quote-unquote, have a backup candidate in mind if they're not able to get DJ LeMahieu to play second base up there in Toronto. And that backup candidate, I think, is Gene Segura. So if they can't get DJ LeMahieu to show up, they could potentially be looking to add Segura to play second base, as it's come out now today that they're interested in Gene as well. So, but that'll do it. That'll wrap it up. Another episode. We did it. Another week in the books. We're getting there. It is Thursday, December 3rd. Hopefully you guys are staying warm, staying safe. I know everything's crazy with the coronavirus, COVID-19, the holidays last week. Hopefully you're still feeling good a week or so later. Christmas coming up. Get your shopping done. Stay safe. No contact. All that good stuff. But today's episode was jam-packed. A lot of names, a lot of information. I know it was a lot for you, but I really do appreciate you guys listening. So I'll ask you one last time, hit that like button. Please rate and review the podcast. But if you can't do any of that, I do appreciate you listening. Share us with one of your friends, and I'll talk to you guys again on Monday. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Have a nice weekend.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.